The brochure touched my lap before the dirt touched her coffin. "We voted," Kara said, as if grief were a committee. I kept my hands folded so no one would see them stop shaking. If you've ever been cornered by family decisions, stay with me. I'm Elena Morse, 62, from Seattle. I still look for my wife whenever I pass Pike Place Market. I did not answer Kara at the graveside. The wind tugged at the tent. The ground smelled like wet clay and lilies. My wife's name hung in the air, half prayer, half echo. A corner of the brochure lifted and tapped my knee. I pressed it flat with 2 fingers and breathed through the sting. I had promised to keep things quiet today. Quiet, I learned, has different meanings depending on who benefits. The brochure was thicker than a church program. Satin paper, glossy front, Ridgeview Long-Term Care in proud serif letters. Someone had dragged a pink highlighter across a page. The line glowed like a wound under the gray sky. "We voted," Kara had said, the way bankers say, policy. She stood close enough that I could smell her winter perfume, sharp and clean, like she had prepared for a presentation and not a burial. I folded the pamphlet once, then again. My hands looked steady, but my pulse kept finding the crease. People think cruelty arrives loud. Sometimes it arrives as planning language. Kara didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She pinned me with a soft smile and an agenda word. Placement. Not home, not rest. Placement. A place to put a woman who loved to make soup from scratch and hum at the sink. A place with whiteboards and shift notes. A place where grief could be scheduled like laundry. I fixed my gaze on the flowers. Yellow roses, green ferns, the ribbon with beloved in gold script. There was a time I would have defended Kara, smoothed the edges, told myself she was practical. There was a time I confused harmony with safety. The minister cleared his throat. The workers waited politely by their shovels. Somewhere behind me, a boy kicked gravel. Every sound felt like a nudge toward compliance. I tucked the brochure into my purse, not as consent, as evidence. The tent caught a gust. My daughter clasped my elbow, then let go when Kara spoke again. "We're all concerned," she said. There it was, the we. I nodded as if concern were a warm blanket and not a net. In my head, something cold and simple started to settle. If grief is a storm, paper is shelter. That thought surprised me. It stayed. After the last hymn, people pressed hands into mine and said the sentences people say. "She's in a better place. Let us know if you need anything." Needs, I learned, had footnotes. A cousin murmured that Kara had organized the church hall and the sandwiches. "Efficient," he said admiringly. I thanked him. Efficiency is beautiful when it serves care. It is terrifying when it serves extraction. I kept my lips soft. I let the room believe we were a family working together. I have learned the value of waiting in plain sight. On the drive from the cemetery, the world narrowed to rain lines and brake lights. The wipers made their patient arc. The heater fan whispered against my shoes. The road sounded like sand under the tires, steady and unchanging. I said my wife's name once. It fogged and vanished on the windshield. Seattle knows rain. It knows the weight of it, the way it cleans and hides at the same time. A van drifted into my lane and back. I stayed centered. I had practiced staying centered my whole life. Today, the practice felt like a problem that could finally be solved. Kara called before I reached the hall. I let it ring, then watched the voicemail transcript appear. "We're all worried about you, Elena. We need to talk next steps." Next steps. As if grief were a staircase, and she was on the landing with the clipboard. I closed my eyes at the red light, long enough for a breath, not long enough to be honked at. The light changed. The line of cars pulled forward. Somewhere in the left lane, a horn bleated and cut off. It felt like punctuation on a sentence I hadn't finished. People stood near the coffee urns at the reception, cups in careful hands. The room smelled like mustard, waxed floors, and damp wool. A volunteer set out another tray of cut triangles. I thanked her and went to a corner table. Kara's voice carried without effort, smooth and low. She knew how to pitch to adults who wanted to believe they were doing the responsible thing. She had that talent long before she married my son. I opened my purse and slid the brochure out under the table edge, The highlighter stripe wasn't random. It sat over a paragraph with numbers. Private room from $5, $890 monthly. Below that, a square for financial guarantor. Someone had placed a sticky arrow on that line. A small one, translucent, the kind used for closings and signatures. My name was printed on the back cover sticker. Company font. Spelled correctly. I ran my finger along the glue and learned something about the day. This was not spontaneous. This was a rollout. My wife and I had a binder on the top shelf of the hall closet. She labeled it, "If One of Us Goes First." She had made jokes about the title, gallows humor that softened the hard parts. Inside were copies of everything we could think to organize. The binder had sat for years, patient, like a promise we hoped never to keep. I could see it from memory, the tab dividers, the neat loops of her handwriting. The memory steadied me. I pushed the brochure into my purse and picked up a plate so people would stop bringing me food I would not eat. Kara joined me at the corner. She didn't sit. She rested her fingertips on the chair back and bent at the waist like a manager addressing a valued but underperforming employee. "We're here for you," she said. Her tone was satin. "We know this is hard." I told her I needed a day to breathe. She nodded as if granting an extension. "Of course," she said. "But beds go fast." The word beds made something in my ribs go brittle. Beds, like parking spaces. Beds, like units. Beds, like inventory. I nodded as if she had reported the weather. A woman from the church asked if we would be setting up a memorial fund. Kara answered before I could. "Yes," she said. "We'll keep it simple." She had the spreadsheet voice on again, the one that put people at ease. Simple is a dangerous word when it stands in for undisclosed. I smiled and said thank you. The woman squeezed my arm and moved away. Kara leaned closer. "Let me take some weight off," she said. "I'll collect the checks. I'll handle the deposit." She was already offering her hands to the handles I hadn't set down. My daughter hovered, uncertain. Grief had loosened her confidence. She kept looking at me for cues, and I kept giving her the same one. Not yet. Not yet is different from never. Not yet is a kind of power. I have been slow to learn that. Kara took a call and stepped into the hall. She pressed the phone to her hair and smiled at someone I could not see. When she returned, she mentioned a realtor friend who had offered to, advise. Advice sounds free until the paper arrives with signatures. I excused myself to the coat room and stood between wool sleeves and the faint suite of cedar. I took out the brochure and snapped a picture of the highlighted page. I took another of the back sticker with my name. I did not know, yet, exactly where the pictures would go. I only knew they would be worth more than a memory later. I folded the pamphlet along a fresh crease and put it away. The coat room seemed to tilt, just a little. I put a palm on the wall until the floor agreed to be flat. Back in the hall, a neighbor stopped me to reminisce about my wife's laugh. The memory cut clean. It reminded me that love is not an asset column. Kara raised her glass to get attention. She thanked the volunteers, the pastor, the flowers. She thanked me for allowing her to help with logistics. People clapped in the human way people clap when they want to reinforce a story. I accepted the applause with my face. Inside, I was turning toward the part of myself my wife always trusted. The part that could stand still while a storm rearranged the yard. On the way home, I drove slowly. The streets shone with thin water. Brake lights made a river of red. The dashboard clock glowed, but I decided not to read it. Time is a tool. Today, I chose not to let it manage me. I turned down the heater a notch and cracked the window for air. The city smelled like espresso and wet cement. It smelled like all the days we had walked under one umbrella and laughed at tourists, getting their first taste of real rain. I let the car find its rhythm. Some truths find you in motion. By late afternoon, I was at the kitchen table. The table where we had signed birthday cards and tax returns. The table with the small heat mark from the time I forgot a trivet. I set the brochure down and smoothed it flat. The pink stripe gleamed like a signal flare. The guarantor line waited like a mouth. I read the paragraphs with the patience I used to reserve for recipes. Ingredients first, then the steps, then the aside in small type that changed everything once you understood it. The packet included a DNR checkbox. It wore friendly language like a sweater, but the knit was tight. The explanation said it would, quote, simplify care pathways. Simplify is another one of those words. On the back, a form asked for authorized contact for financial matters. Under that, a blank for initial property assessment. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. People say wolves dress as sheep. Some don't bother. They assume you won't look closely while you ache. My phone buzzed. A text from Kara. I picked up some forms to make Monday smoother. Smoother. As if we were preparing for a dental cleaning. I typed, I'll review what you gave me. I did not send a question. Questions are invitations. I set the phone face down and opened the drawer with the pencils. My wife always sharpened them to a polite point. I made a note on a sticky square. Who highlighted? Who printed label? Questions that feel small can open doors only lawyers notice at first. I climbed the step stool in the hall and pulled down the binder. If one of us goes first. The cover was a little dusty. I wiped it with the hem of my sweater and held it a second longer than necessary. Grief wants everything to feel ceremonial. Paper does not care. Paper asks only that you read. I laid the binder on the table next to the brochure. The pages inside were not dramatic. They were tidy, names, numbers, copies of forms we might need someday. Someday had decided to be today. I found our advanced directive templates, blank and ready. I found a list of banks with contact names we had gathered years ago. I found a page where my wife had written, in blue pen, home is a choice, not a place. She had underlined choice twice. I felt the floor under my feet decide to be stable again. I am not a lawyer. I am not a fighter by nature. But I am a reader, and reading is a kind of seeing. Seeing is a kind of defense. Defense, I was learning, can be quiet. The doorbell rang and kept ringing. Kara did not wait between presses. I put the binder away and placed the brochure on top of it, like a flag that meant something only to me. When I opened the door, Kara swept in as if the house were a meeting room she had booked. She had a folder under her arm. It bulged with clear sleeves. I wondered how many homes she had entered with that comfortable speed. She set the folder on the console table and smiled hard enough to dim the room. I took the liberty, she said. She slid a packet toward me. Initial guardianship information. Nothing to scare you, just options. She used the voice our bank uses in commercials, gentle, with a hint of, we've already done the thinking for you. I kept my hand at my side. Not today, I said. She tilted her head. It's better to get ahead, she said. Beds go fast. There it was again. Inventory language. I asked if she would like tea. She declined. She rarely accepts what she cannot control. She started listing costs. We can't keep the house in care, she said. It's simple math. She was wrong about the math and the we. I let her finish. People who need control will often tell you everything if you let silence do its job. She talked about burn rates and market timing. She used phrases like, be realistic, and I'm only trying to help. I watched her mouth form the words. Each one slid across the table and tried to name me. I decided not to answer to any of them. When she left, she patted my arm. A gesture meant to register as kindness on witnesses. We'll regroup tomorrow, she said. I'll text. I locked the door behind her. The latch clicked with a satisfaction that surprised me. I set her packet next to the brochure and opened to the first page. My name appeared where it should not. My consent appeared where I had not given it. I took a picture. I dated it in the corner in pencil. I slid it into a plastic sleeve. I made myself a sandwich I could not taste and ate it standing up. Eating mattered because the days ahead would require steadiness. I washed the plate and set it in the rack. These small actions file the hours so fear has less room. Night pressed at the windows. The streetlights hummed. Somewhere nearby, a bus sighed and moved on. I sat again at the table, binder open, brochure open, Kara's folder closed. I wrote a short list of names my wife would have called first. I wrote one more name I had avoided for years, mine. Later, I walked into the bedroom and stood where her slippers used to be. The carpet there has a memory, a different nap from 1,000 mornings. I touched the nightstand and left my hand there until it warmed. I do not believe in signs, but I believe in patterns. Our pattern was simple. We made choices for each other with love. That pattern had not expired. It had been challenged by a new design, efficient and cold. I do not like conflict, but I like theft less. Back at the table, I opened my laptop. I typed slowly, reading each word twice. Durable power of attorney. Agent selection. Advance directive, healthcare representative, successor trustee, neutral party. The language felt like a different country at first, then like a map you could learn if you stopped telling yourself you were bad at directions. I printed one page and tucked it under the brochure. It felt like sliding a foundation stone into place. My phone lit again, a message from my son this time. Kara says you're overwhelmed. We can help with decisions. Decisions. His word, not mine. I stared at the letters until they softened. Then I typed, I'll loop you in when I need you. It was not a threat. It was a boundary. Boundaries sound colder than they are. They are a way to keep warmth from being stolen. I set the phone face down and let the quiet expand around the table like a ring of light. I pulled a sweater over the chair back where my wife used to sit and pretend to ignore my crossword hints. My chest hurt in that thin, hollow way grief invents. Pain wants action. Action can be small. I labeled a folder Home Autonomy and slid the brochure inside. I labeled another Memorial Fund. I had not decided what to do with that yet. I only knew I would not let it become a column on anyone's flip plan. The pencil scratched. The label straightened under my palm. The room agreed, quietly, to become an office. When I finally stood, my knees complained. Age is honest like that. I turned off the kitchen light and left the oversink lamp on. It cast a soft cone over the table. The binder sat in the middle, calm as winter. The brochure lay obediently inside its new sleeve. I was still a woman who would rather make soup than a scene. But the scene had been made for me. Some people fight with fury. I had paper and patience. I had a promise to keep. In the hallway, I paused by the coat closet. I could smell cedar and wool and rain. I thought of all the evenings we had come home, shrugged out of wet sleeves, and laughed at nothing. I didn't cry. Grief will have its turn, but not with an audience. I shut the door and listened to the latch click. The sound was small. It sounded like a decision settling into place. I went to bed and lay awake. The house ticked in the way old houses tick when the heat shifts and the pipes relax. My wife's side was cool. I placed my palm there anyway to remember warmth by shape. I said her name again, in the dark. I told her what had happened. I told her about the brochure with the pink line and the sticky arrow that pointed at my life. I told her I would not make a scene. I would make a record. I would make a plan. Sleep came in thin strips. I woke before dawn and listened to the city stretch. A truck rattled past. Somewhere, a gull cried. Morning smelled like rain starting over. I brewed coffee and carried the mug to the window. Streetlights blinked and gave the street back to itself. I am not brave, I thought. Then I corrected myself. I am not theatrical. There are other kinds of bravery, the kind that wears quiet shoes and keeps receipts. I dressed and put on the black coat that fits me like a sentence I can finish. I placed the Home Autonomy folder in my bag. I slid the binder underneath it. I left Kara's packet on the console table as a reminder that I could choose what entered my day. At the door, I took one last look at the room as if it were a witness. Then I stepped outside. The porch boards were damp. The air tasted like metal and pine. My car sat where I had left it, patient as a dog. I unlocked it, set the bag in the passenger seat, and started the engine. The dash lights came up one by one, small constellations. The radio stayed off. The engine noise filled the space where other people put chatter. I backed down the drive and touched the brakes at the sidewalk. A runner glanced at me and nodded. I nodded back. The city was in motion. So was I. As I turned toward the arterial, I remembered the first time we drove to Pike Place together. We parked 3 blocks away and pretended not to be tourists. We bought cheap flowers and an apple we did not need. We walked under the neon sign and felt ordinary and huge at the same time. I had not passed that corner since she got sick. I planned to pass it today, not as a pilgrimage, as proof that the map was still mine to draw. I merged into traffic and set my mind to the day. I did not have to finish anything today. I only had to begin. A green light blinked into permission. I took it without hurry. The tires sang their low song. My hands loosened on the wheel. The folder sat beside me like a quiet passenger. I did not look at it. I already knew what it said. It said that love is a choice, and so is consent. It said that plans can be rewritten if you are willing to read the fine print out loud. The phone chimed once. I let it. The highway opened for a stretch and then closed again around a delivery truck. I stayed in my lane. My wife used to tease me for narrating other drivers' motives. I could hear her voice, playful and kind, The memory did not shatter me. It steadied me. People can be gone and still keep their promises. I reached for the coffee at a stop and sipped. It tasted like every morning we had ever salvaged with a cup. I set it back carefully. My blinker clicked like a metronome, steady and small. Somewhere ahead, a sign warned of lane closures. I smiled. Warnings are not threats. They are invitations to choose early. I had not chosen early at the cemetery. I was choosing now. By the time I turned toward town, the rain had thinned to a mist that made the world look newly drawn. Cars moved like fish under a shallow tide. My heartbeat slowed to match the movement. I checked the mirror, checked the speed, checked the empty passenger seat where my wife's scarf still lived under the glove box. The fabric had slid there months ago, cobalt and soft. I reached without looking and touched it. The cloth warmed under my fingers, or maybe my fingers warmed it. I breathed and felt the day arrive without asking permission. The brochure in my bag weighed nothing and everything. Words can do that, if you let them. I did not know yet every form I would need. I did not know every office I would walk into or every sentence I would practice in the car. I knew enough to begin. Sometimes that is the whole difference between being managed and being alive. I pressed the accelerator. The engine answered. Ahead, the road lifted and curved. The line of reflectors blinked their quiet code. I followed them, patient and awake, toward a city that had held me for decades and would hold me now. What Kara did at the grave had not been a mistake. It had been a message. I had one to send back. And mine would not be said at a microphone, it would be signed. On the third day after the funeral, Kara arrived early and efficient. She set her leather folder on my coffee table and spread papers with a hostess's ease. My living room turned into a conference room without a vote. The house still smelled faintly of flowers and rain. She had printed an agenda. The first line used her favorite word, placement. The second line said liquidity. The third said timeline. There were no lines for grief. My daughter perched on the arm of a chair and watched me the way people watch a tide. Kara spoke in low, reassuring sentences meant to carry. She was careful with tone, not with intent. She said we needed to be realistic. She said bed availability changed by the week. She said the house was a sweet memory, not a plan. She did not ask what my plan was. She placed a form face down near my hand. The paper waited like a mouth ready for the wrong name. I did not pick it up. I let silence answer for me. Silence can be a kind of mirror. People keep talking when they like what they see in themselves. Kara moved to costs. She quoted numbers as if they were weather. She said $5,890 for a private room, maybe more with incidentals. She said utilities, taxes, insurance. She said burn rate twice, as if I were a log. Then she slid a comps sheet into view, the kind realtors use to warm a sale. It had my block circled in yellow. A license number sat in the header, like a signature that thought it was invisible. I read the number once and filed it in the drawer behind my eyes. I have always been good with patterns, and a number is just a pattern that pretends to be law. My daughter asked if we could discuss later. Kara thanked her for her concern and spoke over the top of it. Concern is a costume busy people wear when they want to move you quickly. I poured coffee to keep my hands busy. The steam fogged my glasses for a heartbeat. Behind the blur, I felt myself harden into a shape that could hold. She left the agenda behind when she left the house. I did not offer to return it. The paper had a neat footer, the kind you add when you expect distribution. I smoothed a corner and read the sections again. Safety, liquidity, placement, timeline. Safety meant moving me. Liquidity meant selling me. Placement meant storing me. Timeline meant soon. The words promised care. The actions promised control. I set the paper under a ceramic coaster so it would stay still. I like things that admit what they are. That afternoon, the pastor stopped by with a casserole and warm eyes. We sat at the table and he made small talk that tried to be big. Kara arrived mid-sentence and laid a spreadsheet between us like an offering. She spoke about projected costs and emotional labor, and used the phrase, "We can't do this alone." She did not look at me when she said we. The pastor nodded slowly. He is good at nodding without agreeing. He asked if I felt ready to discuss future steps. I said I felt ready to drink water and sit in my own chair. Kara smiled politely at my answer, which is what people do when your answer is not the one they listed. I carried the spreadsheet to the sink as if it needed rinsing. The columns marched across the page with the confidence of things that have not yet met resistance. I folded the sheet and tucked it into a manila folder labeled with a pencil. Pencil feels temporary until you press hard enough. I pressed hard enough. Kara took a call near the back door. She lowered her voice, then raised it just enough for the word listing to escape. A little word can be a very large flag when it comes at the wrong time. That night, I stood in the pantry and breathed the quiet sweetness of old wood and flour. I took down the binder my wife had made and opened to the page where she had written, in her careful hand, "Home is a choice, not a place." She had underlined choice twice. I read the sentence until my pulse dropped into its proper lane. Then I copied phone numbers from the contact list we built years earlier, when we thought preparedness was a charm you kept on a shelf. The next morning, a woman named Lydia returned my call. She was a geriatric care manager with a voice like a calm road. She asked me what I wanted, not what I feared. I told her I wanted to stay in my house, hire help as needed, and make my own decisions. She said those were goals, not wishes. She laid out steps without rushing them. Assessment. Care plan. A short list of vetted agencies. A home safety look that did not treat me like a crate. Her sentences fit together the way I like drawers to fit. She did not sell me a bed. She offered me a map. We scheduled an assessment for the following week. I did not write the day in ink. I wrote it in pencil and left room for my name to take up more space. Lydia suggested a neutral healthcare representative for medical decisions if I were ever unable to speak. She said, "Family can be a bridge. Family can also be a flood." I told her I understood. She told me to drink water and eat something with salt. She sounded like my wife in a voice that came from a stranger. I put the phone down and ate toast like it was a ceremony. When I logged into the Memorial Fund account, the page bloomed with polite blues and greens. The balance looked right. The activity did not. 2 withdrawals sat in the list like stones in a glass. 1 for $1, $250. 1 for $1, $250 again. Vendor services, the memo line said, as if a noun could shrug. There is a particular kind of heat that starts in the wrists when you know something is wrong and polite about it. I called the number at the bottom of the page. A woman named Denise answered and listened without interrupting. She said the word flag in a way that felt useful. I drove to the branch because paper behaves differently under fluorescent lights. Rain feathered the windshield. The wipers ticked a clean rhythm. The car smelled like coffee and damp wool. I took a number and sat in a chair meant to keep people quiet. Denise came out from behind a half wall and shook my hand. She wore a name tag and the kind of expression that takes its job personally. We printed statements. We circled lines. We made a photocopy of the funeral brochure because sometimes the human part of a record matters, and you need to show a person what other people did with your sorrow. Denise suggested alerts on the account and a temporary hold until we verified authorized signers. She wrote her direct number on a card and slid it across the desk. The gesture was as simple as a door, and that is what it was. On my way back to the car, the clouds thinned to a pale lid. I sat behind the wheel and felt something old and useful return to my hands. The engine started the way engines start when you turn the key, which is to say, without permission from anyone who thinks they manage you. Kara texted while I was in the parking lot. She wanted to sync later. She liked that word. It made control sound like choreography. I typed that I had errands, which was true. Then I made more. I stopped at the notary, who shares a wall with the UPS store. I signed a durable power of attorney, naming a neutral agent, a former librarian from my street named Marisol Vega, who knows how to organize information and does not mistake calm for weakness. Marisol arrived with a cardigan and a pen that worked the first time. She signed without commentary. We smiled like people who know the value of a quiet room. We walked past the copy machines, and I asked her how many years she had run the children's story hour. She told me 22. She said she missed the part where shy kids speak up when nobody is grading them. I told her I missed that part about grown-ups. She patted my arm in a way that left no fingerprints. Then, we stood by the automatic doors and looked at the rain like it was a program we had both already seen. Paper makes a sound when you slide it into a sleeve. It sounds like a promise that is not loud. On the way home, traffic thickened at the merge. A truck crowded the line and then thought better of it. The heater fan made a small wind at my ankles. I listed the next steps in my head and kept them short enough to remember without a list. Medical directive templates. Successor trustee research. Neutral witnesses for conversations. Copies of everything twice. My wife once told me, when I was nervous about a tax form, that numbers are just stories that think they're special. I believe that now more than ever. At home, a manila envelope sat under my door. Inside, I found a preliminary market opinion from Kara's realtor friend, the one with the bright smile and the license number that behaves like a breadcrumb. The pages gleamed with photos of my neighbors' kitchens and 2 happy yards. The estimated sale price had a range. The range said, "This is reasonable." The range did not say for whom. I read the header again and copied the license details into a notebook with a green cover. I wrote slowly enough to feel the curve of every number. I made tea and opened our binder again. I printed fresh advance directive forms and filled the parts that ask who speaks if I don't. I wrote Marisol's name where the box wanted it. I wrote Lydia's name in the margin so I wouldn't forget to send her a copy. Then I flipped to the tab for trusts. We had filed it years ago as a maybe. I read 3 pages and felt the vague become specific 1 sentence at a time. A no contest clause is a lock. A diversion provision is where the door opens, if someone rattles it too hard. I called a legal clinic downtown that offers short consultations for people who need clarity more than theater. A man named Mr. Patel called me back between appointments and asked questions that respected my answers. He spoke about living trusts as if they were cabinets, not castles. He explained how a clause could direct my estate to a public scholarship if anyone tried to move me without medical basis and my consent. He did not promise revenge. He described consequences. It was better than revenge. We scheduled a longer meeting for later in the week. I wrote the time in my calendar without underlining it. Underlines can feel like traps when your week has been a net. I scanned the funeral brochure and attached it to an email with a simple subject line, documentation. I sent a second email to myself that recounted the graveside meeting in plain language. I added the names of 3 people who stood close enough to hear. Memory is not a contract. A dated note is. Kara called during dinner and left a message about helping me with my mail. She said she could swing by and clear the pile. The pile was 4 envelopes and a flyer. I listened to her voice without interruption. Then I tapped save. I keep what people give me when they think they are giving me help. It helps later. I ate slowly so I would not forget that eating counts. That night, I laid everything on the kitchen table and made a map out of paper. The agenda Kara printed. The comps sheet with the license header. The memorial fund statements with the 2 $1 250 withdrawals aligned like twins who refused to explain themselves. The notary receipt with Marisol's name. The clinic appointment card. The advance directive forms with the boxes checked because I made a choice, not because someone put a highlighter there. I did not draw arrows. I did not draw circles. I placed one sheet next to another until a picture appeared without ink. I slept the way people sleep when the mind's hands are still sorting, thinly and at angles. I woke before the sky made up its mind and walked the hall in bare feet. The boards spoke to themselves. I made coffee and sat by the window. The steam rose like fog off a lake. For a moment I saw my wife in the reflection and then saw only my hands. I had always believed my quiet would buy me safety. It had bought me only more opportunities to be handled. That belief was done. I let it leave like breath in cold air. My son texted mid-morning. He asked if we could keep things calm. He said Kara was trying so hard. I told him I believed he wanted peace. I told him I wanted it too. I also told him peace requires respect. The word respect is not sharp, but it cuts. He said he would talk to Kara. I did not hand them the conversation like a plate. I said, I need a few days to consult. He responded with a single thumbs up, which is a shape that can mean many things when you do not want to type the word okay. Kara arrived again with a stack of forms and a smile that would photograph well. She asked if she could come in. I stepped outside onto the porch instead. The air was cold enough to make my sentences short. She used the phrase, next steps again. She used the phrase, for your own good. She mentioned a wait list. She said she had found a buyer interested in as is. She said the market had a window. I asked her whose window it was. She did not answer the question I asked. She answered the question she likes. When she asked to take the memorial checks for deposit, I asked for a list of names instead. She said she would compile one later. I said I would photograph them now. She hesitated the way a person hesitates when they have misjudged the temperature in a room. I held out my phone and took the pictures while she talked about efficiency. The phone made its soft shutter sound. It sounded like a seatbelt clicking in. She asked me to sign a general authorization to make calls on my behalf. I told her I already had someone for that. Her eyes flicked toward the living room where my binder sat like any other binder. She placed the authorization back into her folder and zipped it closed with the same care you use for a dress you plan to return. She said she would be in touch. I said I would be too. The difference sat between us like a step neither of us would take down. When she left, I called the ethics hotline listed on the licensing board's website. A woman answered and asked for basic facts, not speculation. She listened to my description and told me how to file a complaint if I wished. She did not tell me I should. She told me how. There is a grace in instructions that do not press. I wrote the case number on a sticky note and put it where my eye would hit it on accident. Later is a muscle. You have to use it on purpose. I printed copies of everything twice. I slid one set into a plastic sleeve marked family and one into legal. Then I labeled a smaller sleeve witness and placed the names of 3 people who had heard Kara say, "We voted," in a line that looked like a backbone. I called one of them, a neighbor named Mrs. Rue, who fools people by pretending to be more timid than she is. She said she remembered the brochure. She remembered the pink line. She remembered feeling cold for me. She agreed to write a short statement if asked. She did not ask for anything in return. I thanked her and promised her leftover casserole, which made her laugh like a woman who keeps every promise except the one where she is old. By late afternoon, my stack felt less like a plea and more like a file. The road outside hissed under tires. A bus sighed and went on. I took a walk because the body remembers stress, even when the brain feels clever. The air tasted like wet coins. A man with a beanie and a dog nodded at me. I nodded back. I traced the block and came home, and the house looked more like my house than it had the day before. This is a thing that happens when you make choices inside of it. Kara sent one more text that evening. She said we should finalize by the weekend. She likes deadlines she creates from air. I let the message sit without answering. Not every hook is for my mouth. I wrote a note instead. Finalize what? With whom? By whose authority? I like questions that line up like fence posts and keep animals where they belong. I flipped my notebook shut and listened to the heat whisper through the vent. The sound is small and steady. It says the system is working, not that it loves you. Love is a separate system. It is manual and choice-driven and takes practice. I set my alarm for the morning and then turned it off. I do not need a bell to tell me what to do. I know it now. In the bedroom, I moved my wife's scarf from the drawer to the back of a chair. The cloth was soft against my knuckles. I told her in the quiet that I was tired and steady, both at once. I told her I would not answer to we unless it included me. Then I went back to the kitchen and put my hand on the binder and said out loud, just once, that I was ready to be boring and precise. Boring and precise beats fast and broken. When I finally slept, I dreamed the agenda page had melted and left only the footer, where the date and the page number live. In the dream, the page number read 1 of 1, and I woke smiling because that is the number that belongs to me. The morning came in gray and simple. I made toast and coffee. I put the family sleeve into the drawer by the phone and the legal sleeve into my bag. I stood at the door and checked for my keys, my wallet, my list. I checked for my resolve because it is a thing you can forget. It was there. It weighed less than the files and more than the past. The car started. The wipers found their rhythm. The lane markers winked under the thin rain. I drove toward downtown with a bag full of paper and a heart that knew its work. Kara had staged a vote at a grave. I had counted the hands that mattered. Mine. My wife's words on a page. The names of strangers who do their jobs. The week would keep trying to rename me. I would keep answering to Elena. The rest would learn, one document at a time. The first proof arrived like a polite knock. Denise called from the branch and spoke in careful steps. The two $1 250 withdrawals weren't vendor services. They were routed to an escrow company downtown. The memo line held a tiny number that matched a file code. She read it twice so I could write it once. Escrow isn't a florist. Escrow is where deals hold their breath. I thanked her and let the line go quiet so the truth could finish arriving. I searched the code online and found the company in 3 keystrokes. Their website glowed with smiling keys and staged front doors. A sidebar linked to How Earnest Money Works. I read like a woman finally in her lane. Earnest money is a promise on paper. It starts a clock. The withdrawals had not honored my wife's name. They had started a clock I had not set. The screen light washed my hands. I felt nothing dramatic. I felt the kind of steadiness people mistake for cold. Kara had said beds go fast. Houses go faster when deposits jump first. I opened the realtor's comps again and looked at the header. The license number watched me from the corner. Numbers rarely lie when you let them sit still. I copied the escrow code beside it. 2 small lines drew toward each other without my help. The lines met. The shape they made had Kara's shadow. I played the voicemail from the funeral again. We voted. The words sounded thinner now, like a sweater pilled after one wash. I scrolled further. A half-caught hallway whisper from the reception. Listing. Window. As is. These are not words you use about grief. These are words you use about gain. I imported the clips to a folder and labeled them with dates and places. I would not let emotion ruin my indexing. Paperwork can be devotion when it protects what love built. I called Mr. Patel and described what the bank had found. He did not gasp. He did not throw thunder. He asked me to breathe and then spell the escrow company twice. Bring everything, he said. We will make a clean sequence. A sequence is a story with spine. I wrote the word on a sticky and added it to the map. Then I packed the home autonomy folder, the memorial fund statements, and the brochure that started breathing in my purse the minute it touched my lap. His office sat above a deli that smells like mustard and good bread. The elevator squeaked like an honest hinge. The waiting room hummed with printers and human focus. Mr. Patel met me with a yellow pad and a calm that looked practiced. He took my papers and stacked them square. He numbered exhibits without telling them what to say. We file your living trust updates first, he said. We record the no contest clause and the diversion provision. Then we give people a choice they can't pretend is fog. Clarity has its own weather. We drafted the trust addendum in sentences short enough for a tired brain. If any relative initiates institutionalization without a qualified physician's impairment opinion and my own consent, the trust diverts to a community college scholarship in my wife's name. If anyone contests, their share dissolves into that same fund. The words felt clean. They did not swagger, they did not crow, they simply stood where they belonged and did their job. He asked about healthcare decisions. I gave him Marisol's notarized form. He nodded like a man who collects good umbrellas. Neutral agents keep storms small, he said. We added the advance directive and the durable power of attorney to the bundle. We made copies until the stack felt inevitable. He slid a single sheet across the desk with a paperclip. This is your cover letter to the family, he said. Plain, cold, kind. I read it and felt my breath even out. We addressed envelopes with my son's name, my daughter's name, and Kara's name written as clearly as I could manage. Certified mail turns a hallway into a record. Mr. Patel marked a box on a form like he was closing a drawer. We'll also prepare an elder abuse petition, he said. This is not a weapon. It is a lamp. He wrote the list of exhibits in the margin. Funeral brochure with highlighted guarantor line. Audio excerpt, we voted. Bank ledgers showing escrow withdrawals from memorial funds. Realtor comps with license identifier. I watched ink become a spine. I felt taller without moving. We walked a block to the county recorder's office. The lobby smelled like old paper and floor wax. A clerk stamped the trust documents with a friendly thud that traveled up my wrist. Stamps are not dramatic. They are definitive. The ink dried while we chatted about the rain. When she slid the copies back under the glass, I saw my name printed on the top sheet and felt my posture correct itself by degrees. On the sidewalk, I called Lydia. She had scheduled my cognitive assessment with an independent clinician. You will not be tricked, she said. This is not a trapdoor. This is proof of footing. I laughed once, short and grateful. Paperwork and breath go together when they are used for care. She texted me the address and reminded me to bring water. Hydration always sounds kindergarten until the room is warm and the pen is slow. The clinic's waiting room held plants that looked watered on purpose. A receptionist smiled without trying to fix me. Dr. Chen introduced herself with a handshake that matched her voice. We sat in a small, bright office where the blinds made a gentle barcode on the floor. She asked me simple questions, then layered ones. Names. Recall. Small calculations that felt like counting receipts after a farmer's market. She watched without judgment. I answered until the answers felt like walking, not proving. She printed a letter while I finished my water. "Mrs. Morse is cognitively intact," it began. The sentence didn't feel like a trumpet. It felt like a level. The bubble sat in the center. She handed me 2 copies and told me to call if I needed another. I slid one into the legal sleeve and one into family. Cabinets and castles both need hinges. I thanked her and stepped back into the corridor, where a janitor pushed a cart that smelled faintly of lemons and order. I took the long way home along streets my wife loved, light-pooled in crosswalks like careless jewelry, brake lights stitched small rivers across the hill. I let the timing of the city decide my speed. A bus exhaled. A biker's chain whispered. I felt my muscles remember their jobs. This is how power shifts sometimes. Not in a shout. In a sequence of quiet doors that all open with the same key. When I parked, a registered letter notice leaned in my mailbox with my name. Mr. Patel had moved quickly. I set the envelopes on the table and wrote the list of recipients twice. I photographed the tracking slips. I saved the images to a folder named Trail. The word pleased me. Trails are where people prove where they walked, even after rain. The kettle clicked off. I poured tea and watched steam thin and disappear. Disappearance isn't always loss. Sometimes it is relief. Lydia called to check on me. I told her about Dr. Chen's letter and the recorder's stamp. She hummed the way nurses hum when vitals are stable. She reminded me to rest. "You'll need your shoulders tomorrow," she said. I asked, "Why tomorrow?" She paused. "Because winds still weigh something," she said. The truth of it felt like a blanket snapped flat over a bed. That evening, I assembled the elder abuse petition packet on my kitchen table. I lined up the exhibits until the story could stand without me holding it. I placed the memorial fund screenshots beside the escrow code printout. I added a short, dated statement of what Kara said at the grave. I clipped each section with small binder clips that bite just enough. I placed the audio transcript on top and wrote a single sentence above it. Submitted to show pattern, not to embarrass. Some sentences keep your own soul from fogging. I slept like someone who had learned to trust the lock on her door. Not perfectly, better. The house ticked and sighed. Wind worked the old oak and backed off. I woke before the light changed and made coffee that tasted like a plan. My phone buzzed with a calendar notice I had made the night before. Certified letters. Out for delivery. The words glowed steady. Delivery is a gentle word until it arrives. By late morning, Mr. Patel called again. "We have a hearing date," he said. The words stepped into the room and took a seat. They didn't shout. They didn't celebrate. They waited while I agreed to meet him an hour early. I placed the phone down and lined my shoes under the chair so tomorrow's feet would find them without thinking. I ate a banana. I drank water. I wrote a small note for my daughter and texted it to her. "I'm okay. I'm prepared. Please let the process work." She sent a heart and nothing else. Some answers save oxygen. I drove to the courthouse in a car that smelled like damp wool and resolve. The garage echoed with soft tires. The elevator jittered once and then remembered its job. Mr. Patel met me at security with a folder that looked modest and heavy. He wore a tie the color of gunmetal and a face the color of patience. We sat on a wooden bench while a toddler laughed at her own echo. Laughter in courthouses is a miracle I will never refuse. By the following Monday, the clerk called our case. The words moved the air like a clean blade. I stood and walked toward the room with a back that knew it belonged to me. Kara sat 2 rows ahead, her hair arranged like a promise she had made to herself. My son sat beside her, colorless but present. He turned half toward me and stopped. I let his half-turn be what it was. Mercy looks like different things when it has work to do later. The judge's bench was high and oak. The flags stood like quiet guards. The court reporter watched her machine with a lover's attention. We took our places without theater. Mr. Patel introduced me in a voice pitched to the size of the room. He did not sell me. He did not paint me. He outlined the sequence, like a man drawing a map to a place he had visited many times, without boredom. Kara's attorney began with concern. He used warm words and a long leash. He said family cares can be messy. He said we were all doing our best. He said supervision is a kindness when confusion hardens. He did not say why confusion had to be presumed. He held up the idea of me like a coat and shook it to see what fell from the pockets. Mr. Patel stood without hurry and began numbering facts. He placed the funeral brochure on the evidence cart. The pink line burned under fluorescent lights. He laid the realtor's comps beside it, license number visible without decoration. He placed the bank statements so the $1 250 twins could look the court in the eye. He kept his voice clean. He let the paper speak. Then he read a line from the trust addendum, the one with the no contest clause and the scholarship diversion. The words did not threaten. They advised. The judge's mouth folded once at the corners. He asked 2 short questions about timing. Mr. Patel answered with dates, then left the dates alone. He handed up Dr. Chen's letter. The judge read the first line and nodded as if the bubble in the level had drawn a small smile on the page. Kara spoke once and sounded like a portfolio. We were trying to be practical. The sentence sat in the air, well-dressed and underfed. I kept my hands folded. I have learned that not answering is sometimes how a room hears you. Mr. Patel asked permission for me to speak 1 sentence. The judge nodded. I stood and faced where the words land. Practical would have been love. My voice did not shake. I sat before the echo could make me regret anything but truth. Silence made a brief home and then moved aside for law. The judge set the petition in front of him with 2 fingers. He looked at the exhibits like a man deciding which door is the exit. Mrs. Morse retains her rights. Petition denied. The words sounded like wood finding level after a long winter. My son exhaled a sound he did not plan. It hit the back of his throat and turned into a cough. Kara stared at a point 2 inches above my shoulder, as if control might be written there in small letters. The court reporter paused her hands, then returned them to motion. Lives keep typing even when a paragraph ends. Outside, Mr. Patel handed me copies with a thin smile. Now we let the other pieces do their work, he said. Work means phone calls you do not make, emails you do not see, letters printed on letterhead you did not design. Paper can be quiet and loud at the same time when it is finally in the right hands. On the courthouse steps, my knees discovered gravity and forgave it. The city sounded like a radio tuned to a station named After. A messenger bike whispered past. A woman argued into a phone about parking like nothing had ever happened anywhere. The ordinariness did more for me than hugs. Normal is a promise that keeps itself. We walked to the license board office with the complaint packet under my arm. The receptionist handed me a stamped receipt and a small cup of water that tasted like the color blue. You'll receive an acknowledgement, she said. Then an investigator will decide next steps. She did not wink. She did not warn. She let the process keep its posture. On the sidewalk, my phone buzzed with a new email. Memorial Fund. Hold confirmed pending review. The subject line felt like a hand under my elbow in a crowd. I forwarded it to the folder named Trail and did not type a caption. The record supplies its own captions when the order is right. At home, I placed the court order in the legal sleeve and the stamped complaint in family, not because the family had earned it, but because they should know where the line sits now. I wrote a short letter in ink. I told my son the petition was denied. I told him the trust stands. I told him the scholarship clause will activate if anyone tries again. I told him I will always answer the door to respect. He would need time. I could afford to give it. I could not afford to lend it to anyone else. Evening reached into the house and turned the walls the color of tea. I reheated soup without tasting the fear that used to live beside the stove. The spoon clicked against the bowl. The sound was plain and beautiful. I ate at the sink like a person who has washed a lot of dishes and finds that honest. The phone rang once, then stopped. Kara did not leave a message. Silence can be strategic. Silence can also be a hand dropping what it was never meant to carry. I let the no message sit in the log. Logs are where fires happen and where evidence cools with dignity. I opened the community college website and found the scholarship office page. A photograph showed a woman my wife would have liked, bent over a stack of forms with a pen she trusted. I wrote a note to myself in the margin of a pad. Bench plaque later. Scholarship first. Grief rearranges priorities. Justice arranges them back with names attached. I slept a little and then better. Mornings smelled like rain reconsidering its schedule. I made coffee and wrote thank you notes no one expects anymore. To Denise, for her careful voice. To Dr. Chen, for her letter that sounded like a level. To Lydia, for maps that use care words not inventory words. To Mr. Patel, for not using a cape. Gratitude is not a strategy. It's a maintenance plan for the part of you that must stay human while you win. Traffic built and then thinned while I signed envelopes. Headlights bowed to daylight. Wipers performed their small religion. I drove the long way to the credit union to add the court order to the file. The teller scanned it and nodded in a rhythm that matched her keys. Systems like systems. They talked to each other without needing a story to clap. When the license board email arrived, it was short. Complaint received. Case opened. It listed a reference number and a sentence about process. I read it twice and let my shoulders drop the width of a thumb. Kara had built a stage out of my grief. The boards now belonged to carpenters who measured twice and cut once. I cleaned the kitchen the way we used to do on Saturdays, not because it needed it, because I needed the sound of cupboards closing. Each door clicked like a stamp. Each drawer slid shut like a file returning to its shelf. I set the home autonomy folder on the counter and touched it like a headstone and a birth certificate in the same paper. I drove to Pike Place after lunch and parked 3 blocks away on purpose. The market smelled like flowers that don't know what month it is. The air tasted like fish and sugar and wet stone. I walked past the stall where my wife always chose the too bright bouquet and said the word gaudy like a blessing. I didn't cry. I did not perform. I stood where we had stood. I let the world keep turning without clearing its move with me first. On the way home, a truck cut close and then corrected. The whoosh pushed at my small car and then forgot me. Power shifts feel like that when they land. A pressure. A correction. Then, traffic doing what traffic does. I thought of the judge's sentence, simple as a key clicking. I thought of Dr. Chen's letter, simple as a level finding center. I thought of the scholarship office photo and the memorial fund subject line, holding its shape. My son texted as I turned onto our street. "Mom, can we talk when you're ready?" The words made room. I pulled into the driveway and did not answer yet. Readiness is not a courtesy we owe to other people's calendars. I turned off the engine and sat with the tick of hot metal cooling. The house waited the way houses wait when they trust their doors. Inside, I set the phone face down and opened a window 2 inches. Air moved through the room and reminded it that rooms do not belong to agendas. They belong to breath. I poured water and drank like it mattered. It did. I moved the binder to the shelf with a new label. Executed. The word looks severe. It means finished without drama. Kara will tell a story about today. She will dress it in concern and policy. She will leave out the parts where paper learned her name. She will discover that omission is a kind of confession when other people keep records. I don't need to correct her version in every room. The rooms that matter have file numbers now. The mailbox held an envelope from the court when I checked it after dusk. The order looked less like a rescue and more like a ruler. Straight, useful, unemotional. I slid it into the sleeve behind the trust copy and closed the clasp with a sound I might someday love like a song. The night outside settled from wet gray to wet black. The street lamp buzzed and then found its note. I stood at the sink and felt the floor decide to be still. Power is not how loud you can be. Power is how accurately you can point to the line. We had pointed. Others had measured. The thing sat where it belongs now. Tomorrow has its own paperwork. The scholarship packet. The call to the college foundation. The conversation with my son that requires mercy and a spine. But tonight, the map is drawn clean enough to drive by. I rinsed a glass and watched the water clear the soap in a circle. Clarity doesn't arrive all at once. It's the spiral you stick with until the shine is honest. I dried my hands on the towel my wife used to fold into meatloaf shapes just to make me laugh. The cloth felt like a memory you're allowed to keep in the drawer you open most. I turned off the big light and left the small one over the sink. The glow pooled on the counter like a quiet promise. The house hummed its steady, unromantic song. I carried the legal sleeve to the desk and set it down like a passport you will need again. I opened the window another inch and let the street breathe into the room. The air smelled like rain going easy on us for once. Tomorrow I will answer my son and give him the terms. He will understand or he won't. Understanding is not a condition for my safety anymore. It is a blessing when it happens and a boundary when it doesn't. I will call the scholarship office and say my wife's name to a person who will type it with care. I will drive the slow way and watch the city move. The dashboard will glow. The wipers will tick. The lane reflectors will do their small, holy work. The brochure that touched my lap began this chapter like a rude usher. The paper I filed today closed it without applause. There is more story. There always is. But the power already shifted. It moved on the breath of sentences that refused to lie. It moved under a stamp, under a letterhead, under a judge's plain voice. It moved into a house that chose itself, again without permission. And now the night settles and waits for morning like a decent clerk. I turn the lock and hear the small truth it speaks. I set the folder flat and tell the room I will keep it that way. The engine of the city idles outside and then eases. Somewhere, a light turns green for a stranger I will never meet. Somewhere, a hand writes my wife's name on a line that will help a future student stay. The road is already opening. The plan is already driving. By nightfall, the order felt less like rescue and more like floor. It held. The house sounded different when papers know where they live. Doors clicked with certainty. The heater sighed and did its job without asking for applause. I set the stamped packet on the hall table and let the quiet confirm what the judge had said out loud. The Memorial Fund email turned into a meeting with a woman from the community college. She wore a cardigan the color of wet moss and spoke like someone who likes forms because they make help faster. We sat with coffee that went cold while she showed me a simple path. A named scholarship in my wife's honor. Tuition help for students who are first in their family. I pictured hands taking night classes after long shifts. I pictured a desk lamp in a small apartment and a book held open by a plate. I signed where the lines asked me, not because anyone had aimed a highlighter, but because the choice belonged to me. When I left the office, rain threaded the air like a patient seamstress. I stood under the overhang and said my wife's name once. It did not echo. It landed. The woman at the desk waved and promised to send a welcome letter for the fund. Welcome, I thought, is what grief becomes when purpose writes it a note. The licensing board sent a short message about the complaint. Case opened, investigator assigned, status pending. 2 days later, Kara's brokerage announced she was, quote, on leave. The phrase tried to be neutral and landed like gravity. My son wrote that things had gotten out of hand. I told him the hand was never mine. I said we could talk at the kitchen table if he came alone. He did. He sat where his father used to sit when bills were due. He kept his hands flat, like he was hiding anything that could be turned into a weapon. He started to apologize, then stopped, then tried again. I thought we were helping, he said. The sentence was a coat he had borrowed. He didn't fill it. I poured tea and told him the conditions, and I said them like weather so he wouldn't mistake them for theater. He would keep his share if he completed family therapy with me and signed a boundary agreement about my housing and my health. He would keep it if he stopped letting other people put we in his mouth when he meant I. He looked at the table and then at the door and then at me. Okay, he said. It was a small word, and it was enough for that hour. Mercy is not a coupon. It is a rule you write for yourself and keep. Kara texted 3 times and emailed once with a subject line that tried on outrage and then opted for concern. I didn't answer. Not answering is not war. It is a door that stays locked from the inside. When the investigator called for a statement, I kept my sentences short and let the documents do most of the talking. I did not describe her perfume or the way she watched rooms like inventory. I described actions. The rest will be measured by people who cut wood straight. At home, I did the ordinary things that make a life a house again. The ramp we had planned together went in without ceremony. The crew worked in rain jackets and used levels that made little bubbles square up. The new rail felt like a sentence that ends in a period, not a question. I bought the good light bulbs and tightened the door latch that used to stick when it got damp. I moved her scarf from the chair to a small hook by the door so I could touch it without making a moment out of it. Lydia checked in after the work crew left. We built a light care plan that used my name first. Groceries delivered when it storms. A weekly aid for heavy tasks. Marisol kept copies of everything and put them in an order that would help even if I were tired. You are not being managed, she said. You are being resourced. It is a brave thing to let someone say a sentence like that and not flinch. When the welcome letter from the college arrived, it came with a photograph. A student smiling behind a stack of books with a name badge clipped sideways. My wife would have loved the crooked clip. The letter thanked the fund and asked if we wanted to choose a priority. We did not. We wrote back. Wherever need is loud and pride is quiet. The stamp felt good under my thumb. I took a small volunteer shift at the foundation office, filing, mostly, returning calls that only needed decent listening. The lobby smelled like paper that matters. I carried stacks from one room to another and thought, often, about how my life had been moved on other people's clipboards for a week, and how different it feels when you carry the stack yourself. Power does not always feel like winning. Sometimes it feels like errands you chose. My son kept his appointments. He asked hard things and did not like the answers, which is how growth often begins. The therapist spoke gently about triangulation and money and grief that pretends to be logistics. We practiced sentences he could say without Kara. I hear you. I need to check with my mother. That's not my decision to make. I love you. That doesn't give you rights over her. It sounded new in his mouth. It will sound true later. On a Tuesday that tried to be spring and nearly managed it, Dr. Chen's office mailed a second copy of the assessment for my records. I slid it into the sleeve and felt a small click of completeness. The clerk at the recorder's office smiled when I returned to pick up certified copies of the trust addendum. Everything look right? She asked. It does, I said, and meant the papers and the day. Kara's last message arrived without adjectives. I hope you're happy, she wrote. Happiness is not the measurement. Safety is. Dignity is. Choice is. I did not reply because I do not co-sign other people's scales. The investigator will finish when the rules tell her to. The board will decide what it decides. My work was always less dramatic. It was names and dates and the patience to keep them from smudging. The kitchen returned to its old usefulness. The cutting board stopped feeling like a metaphor and became a board again. I made soup the way we used to make it when the rain got bossy. Garlic, onion, tomatoes that forgave the season. I ate at the table with the small heat mark and read the mail. One envelope held a note from the college foundation. They had received the first transfer. They had already matched it to a student who would be notified next week. I pictured a phone ringing in a small apartment and a voice saying yes, and I felt something unclench that had been gripping me since the graveside. In the evening, I drove the long way past the market. The neon buzzed. Someone juggled in a thin jacket. A couple argued about where to eat with the grace of people who have time. I rolled down the window an inch and let the air come in on purpose. The wipers ticked once and rested. The lane reflectors winked their steady code. It felt like the city was returning me to myself, block by block, not because it cared, but because that's what cities do when you move through them and don't ask permission. My son came by on a Sunday with a loaf of bread he had made crooked. He hugged me without agenda and asked if I wanted to talk about the boundary agreement again. We did. He signed it. He left with soup in a jar and shoulders that looked more like his own. He will have to find the part of himself that knows how to say no to ambition when it wears the face he thinks he loves. I cannot do that for him. I can only keep the lights correct in the room where he practices. At night now, I sleep like a person tired from work, not fear. The house ticks its small truths. The ramp holds. The binder sits on a shelf labeled executed, and the word has softened from severe to simple. I still say my wife's name before I turn off the lamp. I tell her who called. I tell her that the scholarship office sends emails with too many exclamation marks, and I forgive them. I tell her the college lobby plants are watered, and the volunteer coordinator laughs at the same place in every story. She would like that. Sometimes I dream about the brochure. In the dream, it is just paper again. No highlighter, no arrow. It makes no decisions on its own. I wake with that comfort and keep it. I drive to the grocery store and buy exactly the oranges I want. I load them into the trunk beside the reusable bags we forget half the time, and remember now, because memory is a muscle. The road hums under the tires and the car smells faintly of citrus and rain. I do not keep score, I keep records. The difference is peace. The judge's words sit where they landed and do not need me to polish them. The board will send whatever letter it sends. The memorial fund will do its quiet work and never need to be thanked by anyone who benefits from it. I will keep making soup. I will keep walking past Pike Place without turning it into a shrine. I will keep choosing the long green lights when they offer themselves. Soon there will be a plaque on a bench that does not require anyone to touch it to know it matters. Someone will sit and eat a sandwich and complain about the weather and not realize they are part of a sentence that began with a woman saying, "We voted," beside a fresh hole in the ground. That is fine. Stories do not owe context to strangers. They owe continuity to the people who lived them. The car idles at a light. The rain eases. A cyclist shakes water from his sleeves and laughs at nothing. I'm not brave in the way movies like to show. I am precise. I am calm. I am finished with the version of me who thought silence was safety. Paper and patience carried me across. Love gave me the map. If this steady road and its green light helped you hold your own wheel a little tighter, ride with me by liking, commenting, and sharing so someone else sees the rain ease too.